Here we are, week number 3 of this series, Soul Detox. If we've never met before, my name is TJ, pastor here at the Shore Church, and I'm super excited that you're here. If you missed any of our other, in this series, we talked about in week number 1, anxiety. Week number 2 is depression. If you kind of are dealing with one of those things, go back and listen on our website, theshorechurch.com, or you can subscribe through our podcast, iTunes, kind of feed like that. Cool? All right, so here we are, week number 3 of this series. I'm really excited to be here, and I know the question kind of comes up, why Soul Detox, right? Like, why a Soul Detox? Well, think about it like this. I have this bag that I carry around with me. I call it a laptop case. It's kind of like a man purse, like, it's really big. If you really wanted to get technical, it'd be like a messenger bag, and ladies, you would call it like, is it called a satchel? Is that what a big one is? Or a diaper bag, really, is what it really looks like. It's big, carries my laptop, carries my junk. Well, the other day, I went in to go kind of clean out my bag because it was getting really heavy, so I started to sort through it, and I threw it on my desk, and I'm filing paperwork, and I'm throwing away junk that I just collected in there, taking the change out, putting in the change jar, and all of a sudden, when I put it back on, it was a lot lighter. It was a whole lot lighter. And I think sometimes we do that with our soul. We walk through life, we start to collect a couple things, and we get a little heavier, we get a little slower, and our soul just kind of, it's like there's something clogging us. There's stuff getting stuck to us. So every once in a while, we just got to throw it down on the desk, and we need to clean it out. And that's what this series is all about, just kind of addressing some of the issues that we all kind of face every once in a while and getting the junk out of our bags. And so that's what Soul Detox is all about. And here's one important truth that you've got to know when it comes to a soul detox. Your soul is super important. Therefore, we're saying that you're a soul with a body and not a body with a soul. Because when you're a soul with a body, you think of things a little bit differently. Your soul is what lasts forever, but your body will one day fade away. And your soul is your mind and your will and your emotions. It's all the things that make you, you. It determines your personality. It's the way you think. It's what you feel in your heart. It's your emotions, those types of things. Where your body, it's more of the cravings, right? It's the physical. It's the things that you need to feed yourself. You need to breathe. That's the flesh side. Well, one day that flesh is going to go away, but our soul is going to live on. And here's what it says in the book of Proverbs to kind of illustrate this point. When it comes to the soul and the body. Check it out. Proverbs 4:23 says, guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. Guard your heart. Guard your soul. Because what you put in your soul is ultimately going to determine the direction. So the more things you put in, the heavier your bag's going to get. And you're going to be swayed in your direction. You're going to get tired. Or think about it like this in the Good News translation of Proverbs 4:23. It says this, be careful how you think. Be careful with because your mind, will, and your emotions, your thinking, that's your soul. Be careful how you think, for your life is shaped by your thoughts. Be careful what you put in. Be careful what you allow to stay in. So every once in a while, we just need to go through this soul detox and just kind of go, God, is there some stuff in my life that I need to deal with? And we mentioned the previous weeks, kind of what we've been going through. And if that's one of the things that you would like God to kind of work on your heart with, go back, listen to those messages, read through the verses that we were given. But then also, this week, we're going to step into a new territory. We're going to go to a new place, and I'm going to focus in on fear. Fear and insecurity, because insecurity is really just a fear of what other people think, right? And insecurity is a fear that you're not good enough. Insecurity is a fear that you'll be found out. You been there before? You don't have to raise your hand. You're probably too insecure to raise your hand anyway, right? Got some jokes, all right. So, but that's what we're going to talk about, fear and insecurity, which really makes me kind of think like, well, how do we overcome this? Here's what most people try to do when it comes to fear and insecurity. They try to fix it on the outside. But really, we need to fix the inside. Well, I'm so insecure. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to buy myself some new clothes. And then I'm going to look good, and then I'm going to feel good, and then I'm going to be good. Does that work? No, because the clothes fade, right? It may work for like an hour until you eat like a burrito and it's all over yourself, right? At least that would be me, all right? Or we go and we get a new haircut, or we get a new relationship because that new person is going to make us feel good about us because they love us for who we are. And then eventually that new feeling wears off, right? We try to fix the outside. I heard a joke the other day, and you can tell me if it's funny or not. There's this lady, and she heard from God she's going to live for 40 more years. So she decides, if I'm going to live for 40 more years, I'm going to go look good doing it, all right? So she's like, I need to fix the outside. So she goes and she gets a nip and a tuck and Botox. I don't even know what all it is. Sucking fat out of somewhere, just like all that stuff, right? She gets it all done, and the next day she dies. And she gets to heaven. She goes, God, what's going on? You said 40 years. He goes, I didn't recognize you. Right? So, fixing the outside. Thank you. I work real hard all week to make it entertaining for you guys. All right. But seriously, we fix the outside, don't we? We go, I need to look good. I need to feel good. So to feel good, I got to look good. I got to fix the outside. But the outside is not what matters. That's the body. But then there's the soul side to us. And when we work on our soul, the outside will get better. Our personality will get better. You ever meet someone that's just, they're good looking just because they have a good personality? They're just full of joy. They're just full of life. You're like, wow, that person looks good. That's because the inside is right, not necessarily the outside. It was the inside that made a difference. So this week we're going to talk about fear. And there's a definition of fear that I read this week that I want to share with you guys, all right? So this week we're talking about fear. The definition, an emotion induced by a perceived threat. You can write that down if you want. It's an emotion induced by a perceived threat. Now, we get fearful sometimes, right? And as a result, we get defensive, or we run, or we have that fight or flight mentality. Same thing kind of happens in our soul. When we're insecure, when we have that fear of what other people think, we have this, we can either bury our heads, we can run away, we can break up with someone, we can do a lot of things. But here's the key word, perceived threat. Perceived. Now, sometimes we perceive something and it's totally rational and totally natural. Like if you're in Africa on the savannah and you see a lion, you should be afraid, right? That's a natural, healthy fear, right? Or if you're in traffic and there's cars whizzing at you, you should be afraid. But if you're in the United States and in your living room and there's a stuffed animal lion on your couch, you should not be afraid. That would be an irrational fear, right? Or if you're somewhere where there are no cars, like you're being fearful of being hit by a car right now, that's irrational, right? So there's different kinds of fear. So the rational ones we're going to put to the side for a little while because we should have those. They keep us from getting hurt and getting burned and getting run over by cars or eaten by lions, all those kind of things. Those fears are okay. But then there's some irrational fears when it talks, especially in the realm of insecurity. Have you ever thought and looked at the world around you and looked at yourself in the mirror and go, what they're saying about me, I believe that's true. And oftentimes, that's irrational. So many times we get obsessed with our looks, and so many times we get obsessed with our abilities, and we think we're not good enough, and we don't have enough, we're not going to be able to do enough. We're fearful in everything we have. But today, I want to take that head on, and I want to talk about some of the perceived fears and how we can kind of get over some of those things. Because it's really our perception that needs adjustment most of the time, not the actual fears. Let's start on the inside and work our way out, all right? So check this out. I'm going to have a verse for you from Romans chapter 12. This is a pretty well-known verse. If you've heard it before, I want you to look at it with new eyes with me. It says this, Romans chapter 12, verse 3 from the NIV version. It says, do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourselves with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. So on the outside, that verse looks like, hey, don't think of yourself too highly. Don't be haughty. Don't be arrogant. Don't be prideful. But think of yourself with sober judgment. Think of yourself as you really are. It actually sounds like he's trying to humble you, right? But if you go back into the language, the Greek language with which this is written, it's actually 4 times more descriptive than the English language. So when he says, don't think of yourself more highly, that word highly is huperphroneo. And I know you guys wanted to know that, right? Because you're like, oh, sweet, Greek words. We're getting deep, man. All right? But here's what that word means, and it's in your notes if you want to check it out. That word highly means an improper view. It doesn't mean that you're prideful. It doesn't mean that you're arrogant, but it's just an improper view. And sometimes we have an improper view of ourselves that didn't come from God. We look at ourselves as lowly, even though we're not. We look at ourselves as ugly or smart or not talented enough, even though God never said that about you. He says, so don't have an improper view. Don't have a perceived notion that you are in a negative state, but instead, think in a different way. Think of yourself with sober judgment. And again, it's not to humble you. That word sober is sophroneo. So there's huperphroneo and sophroneo. Sophroneo means just a proper view. It means the way you look at it yourself. It says right there in your notes, sober. It means having a right mind. It means thinking properly. It means having the right view of yourself. Too many times we get caught up in thinking of ourselves wrong, don't we? And we look at life and we have this fear of insecurity, and we kind of go, all right, well, I'm not that good of a person. The world has kind of told me I'm not that good. And I'm really not that talented because I met someone that's more talented than me. And I'm not good looking because I compare myself to all the people in the movies and blah, 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 right? We have a hyperphreneo going on. We have a poor view of ourselves. But Paul's telling us through the scripture, don't have an improper view. Don't just listen to anyone, but have the view. Have the proper view of yourself. Look at yourself the way God sees you. Because here's a truth that you really need to know. You'll never be right until you see right. You'll never be right until you see right. Because if we don't look at the world around us through the lens of what God has given us, we're gonna see it through our fleshly eyes, and we're gonna kind of go, well, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I don't have this. Maybe there's a lot of fears going on in my life, and I'm just feeling broken because of it. But if we have a positive view, if we look at life through the lens that God has given us, that sophroneo lens, that proper view, we're gonna perceive things differently. And so when fear is creeping in on us, or insecurity is creeping in on us, we can go, hold up. That doesn't look like what God told me. And so to illustrate this, I want to go to an Old Testament passage. It's about a guy named Gideon. And I talked about Gideon in the spring. So if you want to go really deep on Gideon, go back to the spring. I think it's Running with the Giant series, and you guys can check that out there on our podcast website, again, stuff like that. But this one, I'm just going to highlight one section. And so this happens in the Old Testament. Gideon is an Israelite. He's living in the nation of Israel. And the Midianites, they're a group of people that really don't like the Israelites, and they take everything. They come in every spring, and they come in and they start to take all the grain, all the sheep. They just go through and they completely decimate the Israelites' food reserves, and then they take it away from them to Midian, and then here we have all the Israelites left over with nothing. And so Gideon is caught in the middle of this, and I want to start it out right here in the book of Judges, chapter 6. It says this: the angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah. That's before she had her television show. Come on, that was good. All right, no. That belonged to Joash the Abizrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. So let me explain the scene quickly for you. Angel under the oak looks down in the hole in the ground, because the winepress is a hole in the ground, right? Because you don't want the wine when you're pressing grapes. You ever see the movies where they're like doing this? That's what a wine press is. And so he's down in this hole in the ground, and where they would press the grapes, and he's threshing wheat. Now to thresh wheat, there's a kernel, and then there's like a husk on the outside. So they would roll the kernel and roll the husk off of it because it's pretty light. They'd throw it in the air, and the wind would blow away the husk. Pretty simple situation, right? But the ideal position to be is on a large, flat, high, elevated area so that when you throw the kernel in the air, the wind would blow away that husk. But where is Gideon? In a hole in the ground. His perception, his view, his perspective is pretty limited down there, isn't it? But then there's the angel of the Lord. There's God's perspective. He comes and he just sits down under the oak. Now, there's Midianites everywhere, running around, stealing stuff, killing people, doing all these things. And what's the angel of the Lord doing? He's chilling. Under the oak, just sitting there, looking at Gideon going, what you doing in the hole, bro? Like seriously, what a bad, he's down in the pit. He has a pitiful view. I work hard. Oh, come on, man. All right, so he's got this pitiful view. He's low. He sees walls. That's what he sees. He sees confines. He sees all the things that are negative. He sees the narrowness and the emptiness in the darkness of the pit. He has a very pitiful point of view. But then there's the angel, and he sees everything because he's not in the hole in the ground. And out of that perspective, God says something to Gideon that is pretty cool. And I'm going to just read the next verse. It says this: when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior," to the guy in the pit hiding underground. To which Gideon would go, "You talking to me? Seriously?" You ever been there when someone's like, "Hey, good looking," and you're like, "Me? Awesome. All right, yeah, good day." That's what Gideon's doing here. He's going, "I think you got the wrong guy." But here's the question. I got 3 questions for you today on how to see right. 3 questions. The first question is this: how does God see you? Number 1 is, how does God see you? There you go. How does God see you? Listen, sometimes we get down in this pit. Camera guys are going to love me for this one. Okay. You get down, and all you see is walls all around you. Isn't that what fear and insecurity does? I don't have a good perspective. I have a perceived notion that the world around me is so full of chaos and so full of negativity that I'm just gonna hide. I'm gonna be fearful and hide in my cave for a little while. But from the perspective of God, the angel looks at Gideon and goes, "You're a mighty warrior. There's something great inside of you. You have a pitiful view, but my view right now is pretty good. I can see everything around. I can even see your future. And guess what? You're a mighty warrior." Did he look like a mighty warrior at that time? No. But God saw something in him that he couldn't even see in himself. All of us, from time to time, we get down in this pit of fear and insecurity, and we just feel confined. We just feel trapped. But you know what God's saying? No, there's something great inside of you. In the book of Peter, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, God gives us a wonderful description on how he sees us. And this is the perception. How does God see you? This is the answer to the question. How does God see you? Chapter 2, verse 9 says, "You are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession." That's you. That's what he thinks about you. Even though you feel like there's days where you're down in the pit, even though you feel like there's darkness all around, that the walls are closing in all around you, God looks at you and goes, "You are my chosen people, a royal priesthood. You are mine. You're a holy nation. You're my possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness, out of the pit, out of that lowliness to the ground, and out of your fears, out of your insecurity, into his wonderful light." You want to know how God sees you? He looks at you and he goes, "There's a champion in you. There's a mighty warrior in you." And some of you guys are going, "Well, maybe for someone else in here, but not me." No, you. God has that for you. This morning, he has that for you. And that's the way he sees you. Doesn't matter your limitations, doesn't matter your talents, your looks, your skills. Doesn't matter any of that. Doesn't matter about your past. All that matters is about him seeing you in your future, seeing the potential inside of you. He looks at you and goes, "Wow, there's someone I can get behind. There's a mighty warrior sitting in there." That's how God sees you. So many times when we perceive things poorly, we don't see God's view of the situation. We don't see God's view of ourselves. We're so riddled with fear, we have a misperception of what's actually going on. But God goes, "Hey, I've got a different opinion." Isaiah chapter 55 says this, "My ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts are higher than your thoughts." He looks at the world differently than you. And he sees more than you see. So when he's seeing more than you see and he's doing things differently than you, shouldn't you believe his opinion about you? It's a more pleasant opinion to believe, first of all, because there's nothing wrong with you. He's got something for you. He's got a plan and a future for you. So how does God see you? I can't emphasize that enough. How does he see you? How's it going to work? How is he going to work in your life? And when you begin to start seeing you as he sees you, your life begins to get better and better and better. Because we will never be right until we start to see right, right? Right? Right. All right. We need to see right. Number 2, second question, and this is a question that a lot of people don't even ask, but it's how do you see God? Think about it. How do you see God? All of us probably have a different definition of God based on our experiences, based on our history, based on the baggage in our soul that we carry right now. How do you see God? Many of us grew up in church, and some of the churches we grew up in, or we knew someone that went to church, or we were around a Christian, and they weren't very nice to you, right? They're kind of judgy. They kind of looked down on you like holier than thou kind of a situation, and they weren't really they weren't really nice. And then the churches, sometimes we go to churches, and it's like, "You're going to hell! God hates you, God hates sin, God hates everything," right? Like that's the churches we grew up in sometimes, right? But that's not actually the truth. See, God, he loves you a bunch. He has a great view of you. But the real question is, how do you see God? So how do we see God? Look at Gideon's response. God says to him, "You're a mighty warrior." And Gideon's response is this: "I don't really like you that much." Basically what he says. Let's read it together. In Judges chapter 6, it's on the screens. Pardon me, Lord, Gideon replied, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Why did you leave us? Why are all these bad things happening in my life? You been there before? I don't like God very much. He let this happen to me. This bad thing is in my life, and it's all God's fault. Gideon continues, where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. Here's the guy still in the pit saying to God, I don't really like you that much. I don't really like what you've been doing. And he's assessing all the blame and he's putting it on God. And I can tell you something. I've been there. You've been there before where you're like, God, I didn't like that. I don't like how you handled that. I don't want to be like, that was not cool for me. And he's blaming the pit on God. But what actually led him to the pit was not God, but his poor view of God. It was his insecurity and his fearfulness that actually caused him to climb down into that pit. And sometimes we do that. Sometimes we look at God and we're like, it's all your fault. But what got us here in the first place is not trusting in God to begin with. And we let fear get the best of us. Gideon had the potential to be a mighty warrior all along. God instilled that in him. But it took God calling it out of him for it to actually happen. He had the choice to live by faith or to live by fear. And he chose fear when he climbed down in that pit and he began to hide. And notice, I'm going to skip to the next verse in this passage in chapter 6, in Judges chapter 6. The next verse, it's like Gideon goes, I'm mad, I'm angry, I don't like you. And then the Lord turned to Gideon and he said, you're strong. Completely ignores him. Did you notice that? Like, I don't like you, you've abandoned us, there's something wrong. You're good. Because Gideon's opinion of God does not sway who God actually is. Gideon thinks lowly of God, but God thinks highly of him, and he's calling him out of the darkness anyway. So how do you see God? David, he's a great man of God. You see in the Old Testament, probably one of the most famous stories in all the Bible is David and Goliath, right? David overcame fear again and again and again. He displayed courage again and again and again. And guess what? He lived a life full of courage. Gideon, quite opposite, right? He's hiding in the pit. He's not displaying courage. And so we look at David's writings, we look at Gideon's writings, and let's go to the book of Psalm chapter 59. And this is what David says about God. You are my strength. Gideon's saying, God, you abandoned me. God, you're my strength. I wait on you to rescue me. For you, O God, are my fortress. In his unfailing love, my God will stand with me. So which one is it? God, is he, like Gideon says, a God who abandons us? Or is he a God that stands with us, like David says? Think about it. The two differences are only a perceived notion. The only differences are the way they looked at God. And guess what David did with his life? He looked at God with a proper view, and he overcame the lion, the bear, Goliath. He became king. He ruled. He conquered many nations. God used him to do great things. Why? Because he had a view of God that was proper. He wasn't riddled with insecurity and fear all the time. I'm sure there was moments where he was. But Gideon, he was paralyzed by it. That's the place that he started. And I don't know where you are, but sometimes we need to ask ourselves, how do we really see God? Are we really looking at him from the proper perspective? And finally, number 3, the last question you got to ask is this. How do you see yourself? How do you see yourself? Because oftentimes a misdefinition of who you are limits you more than anything else. And so the follow-up question is, how do you see yourself? Are you seeing yourself the way God sees you? It's probably a more accurate question. Do you see you like God sees you? Here's the passage in Judges. The story continues after the angel completely ignores Gideon. He goes, the Lord turned to Gideon and he said to him, you are strong. Go and save Israel from the power of Midian. I am sending you. But Lord, and this is where Gideon's view really starts to come out. This is where Gideon's true identity is being shown. He probably wasn't that angry at God, but now we're getting down to a deeper layer. This is how he sees himself, and this is why he was so defensive. But Lord, Gideon asked, how can I possibly save Israel? My family group is the weakest in the tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least important member of my family. How does Gideon see himself right here? Man, my family's no good. We're all terrible warriors, man. I mean, like, we hurt ourselves with toothpicks. It's awful, right? And I'm the least out of everybody. Like, I'm the guy that got, beat up in school. I'm the guy that got left behind. I was the D student and I couldn't even make the freshman basketball team. I'm the worst of the worst, man. And Gideon begins to just really show himself to God. And he gets real honest for a moment. And I think if you guys were honest with me, some of you guys would be like, that's kind of how I feel right now. I feel like I don't know, I just don't feel like I have much to offer God. Like, TJ, you talk about doing something great for God. What do I have to offer? Tell you what, Growth Track 3.0, right after service, we're going to give you a spiritual gifts test, personality profile, get your experiences. We're going to help you connect the dots. If you're interested in learning more, after service, 12 to 1, head on down, ask someone with a surf shirt on. They'll get you in the right place. I'll even feed you lunch, all right? But that's it. That's my solution, is to help you find what God has made you to do. Because I want you to have a good view of yourself. And Gideon, he's going, I'm the worst of the worst of the worst. I can't do anything. And then I love just, the Lord answered, I'll be with you. He's like, of course you can't do anything. But I'm with you. Like, of course you can't do anything on your own. Of course, TJ, you can't change people's lives, but I'll do it for you. Great, God, because I need some help up here, right? TJ, you can't start a church. Churches don't start out of nowhere. But God's like, I'll do it. Great. Can I come along for the ride, God? You can't change the world. Sure, God can. He just wants to use you to do it. You just got to overcome some fear and choose to have a proper perspective of what God says about you. How do you see yourself? He goes, I'll be with you. So you will strike down the men of Midian all at one time. He's like, we're going to do this thing. And I'm on your side. And I'm with you. And then finally, in verse 24, Gideon built an altar to honor the Lord there and called it, the Lord is peace. And that word peace is shalom. I'm sure you guys have heard the word shalom before, right? So shalom, which actually doesn't mean like peace, like sleep and heavenly peace, like the Christmas song. It actually means more like I'm content. I'm at peace. I have a lot of contentment within me. And so when Gideon built that altar, it kind of was a turning point in his life. He says, I can't do this on my own. God says, I'll be with you. And then there's this contentment there. There's this, I know who I am. I'm defined by God. I'm defined by him who created the entire universe. And he looks at me and he goes, mighty warrior, I can live with that. I can do this. And Gideon keeps believing that, and he keeps doing more and greater feats for God every single step of the way, overcoming fear, overcoming insecurity. I have three little girls now. Two of them can talk. And so I talk to them about this all the time. I tell them, you're beautiful. There's beautiful girls in the entire world. I tell them, you're the smartest kids in the entire world. You guys are just little geniuses, right? And McKenna's like, well, I'm just not that good at math. I'm like, you are great at math. I like, no, you're going to be awesome. She just doesn't like math, whatever. And I keep telling them that. I tell them that every single day. Every day. Because there's going to be a day in middle school, probably, where some punk kid comes to my beautiful, perfect little girls, and he's going to tell them, you're dumb. You look ugly. And I'll restrain myself. I won't drive over to that middle school, right? And my girls are going to look back at that kid, and they're going to go, my father says I am. Because every day, for years, they've been hearing one thing, that they're beautiful, and they're smart, and that I love them, and that I'm always going to be there for them. But here's what happens in our life. We tend to tune out the voice of God that's saying, you're beautiful, and you're smart, and I got a plan for you, and I'm going to work in you. And we start to believe the lies that are saying, you know what, you're not as good as you used to be. And then there's something wrong with you, and you're not smart enough, you're not talented enough. But when that voice comes in your head, my father says I am, because I've got a different definition. I'm perceiving differently now, because God is doing something inside of me. My father says I am. The best way to hear God's voice is to have a relationship with him, right? The best way to know his voice is to have a relationship. And that relationship is made possible because of a man named Jesus, who 2,000 years ago came to earth, died on the cross to remove the gap between us and God. And that gap was called sin. Now that sin is gone, there's nothing between us and God if we just say, God, forgive me of all the sin, remove it. I want to have a relationship with you. And when we have that relationship with God, we begin to hear the voice of God and what he says for our life. Without that voice, without that relationship, we're kind of on our own. And let me tell you, based on personal experience, I'm sure you've been there, the world is terrible on our own. The world has nothing positive to give us. But God's voice, something incredible. And so today, I'd like for you to pray a prayer with me that just kind of says, God, I want to have that relationship with you. And many of us will say that for the first time. We're going to say this prayer. But many of us will say it for the millionth time. Doesn't matter. We just want to get a closer relationship with him, right? So do me a favor. Why don't you close your eyes, bow your heads, kind of block everything else out. And I want you to pray with me really quickly. And repeat after me. Nothing magic in the words, but it's all about your heart. Everyone repeat after me. Say, Dear God, this morning we pray that you would forgive us of every sin. Help me to have a better relationship with you so that I can hear your voice and see me as you see me. Father, I pray right now over every person here. I know that sometimes the enemy wants to sneak in and say, this is for someone else, this is not for you. Right now, I pray that we would hear with clarity exactly what you have for us, God. That you desire to have a relationship with us, that there's a mighty warrior, a champion inside each and every one of us that you're calling out, removing the barriers of fear, getting us out of the pit, out of darkness, and into your wonderful light, God. I pray that we would see ourselves as you see us, and we would see the people around us as you see them. Thank you, Jesus. In your name we pray. And everybody says, amen.